Good morning, Michelle Grattan.
Good morning.
I'd like to focus on the interview that you had with Bill Shorten this week as he approaches his first anniversary as Leader of the Opposition. But before I come to that, news yesterday of an agreement between the government and Clive Palmer which will lead to the return of temporary protection visas. This is quite a significant development in Australian politics. What is your reaction to it?
It's a breakthrough for Scott Morrison, the Immigration Minister, who has not been able to get this measure through the Senate previously. This goes back, of course, to the Howard era when these temporary visas were given. But from Clive Palmer's point of view, he was always critical of the visas, but he's decided now that this is the lesser of two evils, that otherwise these people won't be processed. There are about 30,000 people who came under Labor. A few came under this government. They're mostly in the community. There are some on Christmas Island, including several hundred children on Christmas Island. They would be able to get into the community. Now, what Clive Palmer's got out of this deal is that there would be a second sort of temporary visa. It would be a 5-year visa. People would go to the regions where there was unemployment, where there was a labour shortage, and they would have to be accepted by the communities. The government wouldn't force communities to accept them, but if they did accept them, and these people worked for 3.5 years out of the 5 years that the visa ran, they could then apply for another visa, such as a student visa, skilled migrant visa, and that would be a way of permanently staying in Australia. Now, Scott Morrison said they won't get a permanent protection visa, and he has been dragged to this sort of visa screaming, as it were, but nevertheless he's got through what he wanted, and the road to permanency for these people would be a very long and hard one. But it would be there.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll come back to this as the details become clearer. Can I focus now on your interview with Bill Shorten? I'm going to look at the present and the future rather than go over Rudd Gillard memoirs and that kind of thing. But before I get to any detail, what did his mood seem like?
I think his mood is quite a good one. Labor is in a good position, of course, in the polls. I think few people would have expected it to be in this position a year in, because it did have a bad defeat. However, I think that Bill Shorten is very aware that this is early days, and this is people really, when they're asked by pollsters, making a judgment more on the government than the opposition, and things could be very different if you were in an election situation. So he knows there's very hard work ahead of him, that on the balance of probabilities it's very, very difficult for an opposition to win after one term. People really don't expect that to happen, despite the government's troubles.
That was a theme really about how hard work it is being in opposition, being the leader of the opposition, compared with being a senior minister in a government, he was saying.
It is hard work because an opposition leader has to carry so much. All the attention in opposition is on the leader. The shadows don't get much of a look in, except the deputy and the shadow treasurer, but for the rest of them, they are in the background. Now, when parties in government, of course, the attention is rather more spread, even though most of it's on the Prime Minister, but it's still a more even spread.
On the Middle East, he says he is trusting the government, he's taking them at its word. Does he have any realistic choice but to stay close to them in a period of national tension? The incumbent government has the advantage. Does he have to stay close to Tony Abbott's position?
I think he did have to stay close, does have to stay close. There are various layers of this, of course, because there's the anti-terrorism legislation, which is pretty draconian, and the opposition had some differences with the first tranche. Now amendments have been made, and that's gone through the Senate this week with general agreement from the opposition, but there's another bill that's come in covering foreign fighters that has to go through all those processes. Again, there'll probably be some differences of detail, but I think that in the end Labor will stay close on that too. And then of course there's the military commitment. Now in 2003 there was a partisan split on that. This time I think that Shorten himself is inclined very much to think that this commitment is right, so it wasn't that hard to stay close. On the other hand, of course, the left in the party, although it's sticking with the position, some in it have some doubts. Melissa Park, for example, has articulated those, prominent backbencher. And the danger for Shorten is that there ends up being mission creep. And most immediately, I suppose, that the federal government changes its position on not being part of an exercise in Syria. That's its position at the moment. But if it became part of the Syrian attacks, then I think there would be real trouble in the Labor Party and for Shorten.
Well, one topic that he's not staying close to the government on, it seems to be climate change. He seems committed to action, and the way he was expressing himself in his interview with you was quite, I think, forthright. But does he have any policies that are likely to appeal to the electorate any more than the previous policies of the Labor Party? He's
going to go into the next election supporting an emissions trading scheme. And he says this is not a carbon tax. But it will depend, I think, on a couple of things as to how he goes with this. Firstly, the design of the scheme, whether the scheme is minimalist enough not to be able to be portrayed as a threat to growth, whether it's linked into what other countries are doing, will do. Secondly, I think it'll depend on how much climate is an issue in 2016, and that in turn will be related to how the big Paris conference on climate, which is next year, works out. If there's international momentum from that Paris conference, then there'll be more domestic feeling in favour of Australia taking action, and some pressure will come back onto the government, people saying it's not doing enough.
Finally, Michelle, Bill Shorten seems to be positioning himself as a principles-based politician, trying to bring the party together and unifying the nation. But can a Mr. Nice Guy approach work in Australian politics these days?
Well, we probably shouldn't overestimate the extent to which he will be Mr. Nice Guy, but certainly his approach is one of trying to get consensus. He casts himself as someone who can talk to business as well as the workers, the Labor side of the equation. He says he's good at collecting ideas, distilling ideas, making sure the good people, the experts, are in the room, as it were, and he's trying to tap into a lot of expertise in the community. I think that's a very sensible way to go, and given his past, when he was able to talk to employers as well as being a union chief, and also given the success that Bob Hawke had in the 1980s with a consensus approach, it's not a bad building block if you can make it work.
Fascinating. Thank you, Michelle Grattan.
Thank you.